Good evening. The capital of the United States was seized today by resignation fever. It was brought on by the continued seclusion of the president, by increased resignation pressure from Senate Republicans, by less than ironclad denials from the president's spokesman, and by a series of crisis meetings between Ford and Haig, between Ford and Rhodes, and between Nixon, Scott, Goldwater, and Rhodes. At day's end, the president seemed to be shifting. Dan Rather reports from the White House.
The president tonight is reconsidering whether to resign, step aside temporarily, or sit tight while fighting impeachment to the end. No one at the White House can be found who expects any decision to be announced tonight. Some of the president's aides told CBS News today that there would be an announcement before the end of the week. One said the announcement probably would come tomorrow. There was no official confirmation. A number of the president's own aides said privately they do expect him to resign, but others, including William Timmons, Rosemary Woods, and Stephen Bull, denied that resignation is imminent. As for reports by the Providence, Rhode Island Bulletin and Phoenix Gazette newspapers saying flatly that the president has decided to resign, White House press office spokesman said officially only that they would not confirm any such reports. In late afternoon, Presidential Chief of Staff Alexander Haig and News Secretary Ronald Ziegler went to the president's private office next door to the White House. In the atmosphere of expectation and tension, there was a momentary rush of confusion as reporters besieged press aide Tom DeCare to find out what was going on. He didn't know. Minutes later, the president and Ziegler emerged from Mr. Nixon's private office, walked into the White House, and the president went into a meeting with Republican congressional leaders. Senate Minority Leader Hugh Scott and Senator Barry Goldwater, plus House Republican Leader John Rhodes, met with the president in his Oval Office. CBS News had been told that the three Republicans had with them for presentation a draft of a sense of the Congress resolution designed to grant the president immunity from both civil and criminal prosecution if he would step down. But Senator Goldwater, as he appeared with his congressional colleagues on the White House lawn after the meeting, denied that immunity had been discussed.
Congressman Rhodes and Senator Scott and I have just concluded a visit with the president. He invited us down this afternoon to disclose to him what we feel the actual conditions in the House and the Senate are relative to his situation. We had a good, thorough discussion. And I think I speak for my two colleagues when I say that we were extremely impressed with the uppermost thought in his mind, which is that whatever decision he makes, it will be in the best interest of our country. There's been no decision made. We made no suggestions. We were merely there to offer what we see as a condition on both floors.
We have told him that the situation is very gloomy on Capitol Hill and that it is a very distressing situation, and we gave him further evaluations, which I think ought to remain between ourselves.
Did any of you recommend that he resign?
No, that subject didn't even come up.
The President stressed that his decisions are made and will be made entirely in the national interest.
This gloomy forecast, what was his mood to the gloomy forecast, sir?
The president is in entire control of himself. He is serene, and he was most amiable, and I assume that he simply accepted our evaluation since he had solicited our views.
Just before nightfall, Secretary of State Kissinger was seen coming into the White House. The Nixon family spent some of the day gathered around the president. The last official statement from presidential spokesman is that they know of no change in the president's position, that he plans to remain in office through a Senate trial. Dan Rather, CBS News, the White House.
A variety of developments today added Senate Democratic leader Mike Mansfield said today he favors following through with impeachment even if the president resigns. In Mansfield's words, this matter has gone on too long and too far not to be carried to its ultimate conclusion. But the Senate's second-ranking Democrat, Robert Byrd of West Virginia, disagreed. Byrd said it would be like kicking a man after he is down. Because he had been one of the president's Defenders, California Republican Congressman Charles Wiggins got an advance briefing about the new tapes which have brought the Nixon presidency to this crisis. It happened Friday at the White House, and today Wiggins told Bruce Morton about his reaction to those transcripts.
I left after about an hour and drove back here to my office in a state of some agitation, I suppose would be fair. I had been working that day, all day, on the anticipated floor debate and the proper organization of that debate. I remember coming in here and tearing up my notes that I'd been working on. I called in my administrative assistant, Pat Rowland, and told him that the series of meetings which I had organized for Republican members to explain the evidence in this case should be canceled. Well, on Sunday morning, after worrying about this for most of Saturday, and I came down here to my office and reviewed all of the presidential statements post June 23rd. And it's clear that they are inconsistent with the presidential knowledge on June the 23rd. Well, on Monday, I obviously was asked many questions by my colleagues as to why the meetings were canceled, and I told them all just to sit tight. It was easy for me to give as an excuse the rampant rumors that the president was going to make a statement because the news wires contained information that he'd been at Camp David with his speechwriters. And I just told my colleagues that they ought to wait until the president made that statement, and we all ought to, and just sit tight. And so I sat tight on Monday, and of course Jim St. Clair came down here on Monday at 3:30 and made a full disclosure of everything that he had told me on the previous Friday.
You were perhaps the president's ablest defender on that committee, but you were not his only one, and yet you were singled out for this kind of early warning.
I didn't ask, and I wasn't told. I've been asked that subsequently by people such as yourself, and I just don't know. If I had to guess, I think that it probably was a desire on the part of both Mr. St. Clair and Al Haig to anticipate the impact that this would have, and they needed a sounding board. And for reasons known best to themselves, they bounced it off of me. I certainly did not mislead them as to what I thought the impact would be, or that the impact in fact was. It was going to match, in my view, the kind of response to the Cox firing, or worse. Pretty much overwhelmed with the reality that a president of the United States was confronting impeachment.
Although the focus of the Watergate story right now is on the future of the Nixon presidency, the courts still are busy with other aspects of it. The White House today turned over more tapes, but said that some conversations covered by the Supreme Court ruling were never recorded. And Texas lawyer Jake Jacobson pleaded guilty of bribing John Connally. Leslie Stahl reports.
Delivery was on schedule, the last batch of Watergate tapes arriving in a silver-gray suitcase with Secret Service escort. The president's lawyer, James St. Clair, told reporters he had no knowledge of any plans for resignation. St. Clair handed over all but 9 of the 31 conversations due today, explaining that, to the best of his knowledge, 7 were never recorded and 2 others have not shown up in an extensive search. St. Clair told Judge Sirica that 7 of the unrecorded tapes were phone conversations from the president's residence where there was no taping system. 2 others were of meetings at Camp David. It did not appear that any of the tapes were missing under suspicious circumstances. St. Clair was entirely conciliatory, saying at one point, anything that's reasonable we'll be pleased to do. And he said the president has begun searching his own files for any personal notes on Watergate. In another courtroom today, Texas lawyer Jake Jacobson pleaded guilty to a charge of bribing former Treasury Secretary John Connally. Jacobson admitted that he gave Connolly $10,000 from a large dairy cooperative in return for Connolly's recommendation that milk price support levels be increased. After plea bargaining, Jacobson agreed to testify against Connolly, and the special prosecutor agreed to drop an unrelated indictment for which Jacobson could have been sentenced to 35 years in jail. Now he faces a maximum sentence of 2 years. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, Washington.
A resignation by Richard Nixon might resolve the problems that have overtaken his presidency, but it might also create more problems for Richard Nixon personally. Fred Graham has that story.
As long as Richard Nixon is president, he's immune from prosecution for Watergate-related crimes. So it seemed unlikely that he would resign without first obtaining immunity from prosecution. This could come in any of 4 ways. First, Congress could pass a law granting him immunity. But events seem to be moving too fast, and many congressmen believe the law would be an unconstitutional intrusion by Congress into the authority of the judiciary. Second, Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski could ask a court to grant immunity in exchange for Mr. Nixon's promise to testify. There have been no reports that this has been considered. Third, President Nixon could pardon himself. This has never been done, and nobody has said Mr. Nixon is considering doing it, but an 1866 Supreme Court decision said the president's power to pardon is unlimited except from impeachments. And fourth, and apparently most likely, Gerald Ford could become president and grant Richard Nixon a blanket pardon in advance against any Watergate prosecution. But Ford would probably not act without the approval of congressional leaders because he's expressed disapproval of such deals.
If a president resigned his office before his term expired, would his successor have the power to prevent or terminate any investigation or prosecution of criminal charges against the former president?
Would he have the authority?
Yes, would he have the power?
I don't think the public would stand for it.
But even if Mr. Nixon was to get immunity in any of these ways, several legal problems would remain. He could be subpoenaed to testify in all Watergate-related cases. He could still be indicted by state or local prosecutors for any Watergate crimes committed in their jurisdictions, although this would probably not happen. He could be sued in civil cases by victims of wiretapping or other illegal governmental acts, and he could be disbarred from the practice of law. So even if President Nixon should leave the White House with full federal immunity, he could be tied up in unpleasant and perhaps humiliating court proceedings for years to come. Fred Graham, CBS News, Washington.
On Wall Street today, the averages continued to go up in anticipation of a change at the White House. The Dow Jones Industrials closed up nearly 24 points.